So definitely investing in yourself and your skill set, your ability to earn income, I think is one of the greatest things that you could possibly do for yourself in terms of, financial security. And during those years in your 40s, you're probably in a position where you really want to try and maximize your earning capability.
Yeah.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are again, back at our favourite time of the week.
Andrew, not only are we back again and the favourite time of the week, but this is the second part in our 3-part series.
Yeah.
So last week we spoke to everybody about the financial decisions that you should think of and be making in your 30s.
Yep.
Which we could both relate to. This one's going to be a little bit more challenging because we're not at that age demographic yet, but this is the 40s, right?
Yeah, exactly right, Bill.
Andrew, let's kick it off so I don't have to lie about my age anymore. What are we opening with everybody today?
Yeah, I mean, look, once you're starting to hit your 40s on your wealth creation journey, you really should be, pretty serious about what's happening. You should have a very good idea in terms of your cash flow. You should have a really good idea in terms of your budgeting. So all of the things that we spoke about, when you're in your 30s in terms of getting those good habits should already be in place. I think that really the first kind of step is just really getting some clarity and some control. Like, I think clear goal setting starts to become important. What does your retirement potentially look like? And maybe that's not fully formalized yet, but, kids' education.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they going to go to school? How's that going to get funded? Is that going to get funded out of cash flow? Is that going to get funded via, a mechanism that you need to put some money aside for? What does that debt-free date kind of look like?
Yeah.
Are you in that large family home, or is there a goal to upsize the family home and, buy that forever property? And then also just some financial decluttering. So we do tend to find that, when you're trying to get that clarity, sometimes you have, money stuck in this old account, maybe, set up an account here, maybe, put some money towards a random investment because someone told you about it and it was great. Starting to just declutter and set some really clear goals around what your, financial life is ultimately going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that sets the scene. Probably the other one that I'd add to that is if you're this way inclined and don't necessarily feel that you need to do it, but for us, in terms of what we advocate and talk to people about, it works really well because it helps, I think, formulate goals, but just tracking your net worth position and just seeing what that looks like. And over time, you might see some patterns emerge, or you might see something specifically that you want to focus on. As an example, that debt-free date that you spoke about, that's, for us that are carrying mortgages, it's one of those things that seems to be there. And it's just like, that's the thing that impacts us. If you're tracking it, the thing that happens for me, at least personally, is I look at it and go, geez, this debt is not going down fast enough. So I keep thinking about that. And yes, I've got a debt-free date and all of that sort of stuff, but you want to try and set a goal, but you want to try and exceed that. So clarity and control, I really love that. And I think that from a peace of mind perspective, that could create so much benefit by doing that. There's a lot more in it, but I think that's a really good starting point. Probably the next one for me, and this is just, I guess it's low-hanging fruit, and we talk about it all the time, but doing a check-in with your superannuation.
Yeah.
So thinking about, at least initially, from a retirement perspective, and it might be a bit too early depending on where you're at, but at least starting to formulate maybe a number and saying, hey, in the event that, I'm generating all of my income passively, so there's no work, there's no personal exertion, just with the assumption, because you might enjoy what you want to do and keep working, but how much would I want to live off at a particular point in time when that's my only source of income that's coming in passively? What is that number?
Yeah. And how much super balance do I need to, start to actually get that number?
Reverse engineer it and then work that out and start working towards it. And the benefit of thinking about this sooner rather than later is it's because you've got the most important thing on your time from an investing perspective, and that's compounding interest and time.
Yeah. And I mean, look, one of those things that, once you start to get into your 40s, superannuation starts to become more of a focus because you recognize the fact that, hey, this is going to be an income that I can generate in a tax-free environment when I do eventually retire. And maybe it's not as much within your purview in your 30s when you're really starting your career out and maybe don't have as much in superannuation. And everyone's strategy is going to be different because some people are going to be self-employed and they're going to be putting money towards businesses and not necessarily focusing on superannuation and all of that stuff. But I think that in your 40s, really strongly considering salary sacrificing money into super and starting to put extra above and beyond can be a really worthwhile strategy for you as well.
Yeah, and then I guess you take that one step further from a tax reduction point of view. I mean, obviously there's benefit with that as well too. But some optimizing strategies from that perspective. But thinking through, assuming that things don't fundamentally change in Australia, the superannuation system remains the most optimal place to be drawing passive income from. Obviously, there's limitations as to when you can access that, but thinking through what that looks like as you get closer, what we tend to find with clients is, they want to maximize that opportunity as they get older because they see it, and then they always turn around and say, "I wish I did this earlier."
Yeah, exactly.
But once again, knowing that it's a juggle around cash flow and what's the trade-off and where do you put that money?
Yeah, and look, speaking of trade-off and where do you put the money, I think that at this point in time, really you're starting to consider, lifestyle, legacy, retirement, all of those things are really starting to play in. And so starting to, and we touched on it when we, focused on setting clear goals, but, balancing everything out at this point in time. I mean, do you, live a really great life now and not fund as much in preparation for the future? Because, I don't know, maybe there's future inheritance coming in, maybe there's other things that will ultimately come into it. Or, do you look at, hey, okay, I need to build for my retirement, or I need to fund big ticket items like renovations or like private school fees or like family traveling. All of those things need to ultimately play into the mix when you're starting to think about, hey, what is it that I actually want to achieve and what do I want to get out of, my financial life? And within that, I'd also put teaching good money habits to kids. There's a lot of tools out there to do so. And I think that this is massive. I mean, particularly when you work in financial advice, I think what you start to realize is that most of your money habits are learnt from the home. They're not taught anywhere else. And so most of the time, and this is a very general statement, but when we see, a client come in and parents are really good with money, generally kids are really good with money. The opposite is also true for, when parents aren't so great with money and kids, unfortunately, don't learn those tools and habits. So I think that starting to pass on that that knowledge is really important as well.
Yeah. Andrew, coming back to the debt piece, we obviously spoke about the mortgage and starting to think about what that debt-free date looks like. Let's go a little bit deeper. I think in terms of debt, if you can have the debt that you do have, if you can have deductible debt rather than non-deductible debt, that's obviously more beneficial and more optimal. One extension of that is try and have no personal debt.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'd love to be able to wave a magic wand and say, get rid of the mortgage tomorrow. So we kind of isolate that one in its own bucket. Investment debt is good because you can claim a tax deduction. But this personal debt, consumer debt, call it, absolutely terrible. And hopefully there's some of those things, if that was part of your spending habit or your consumption, hopefully that's gone by the time you're in your 40s, because that can really have a huge impact. And not only because it's bad and what have you, but it creates the wrong types of behaviours.
Yeah.
And I really feel like it's unfortunate, but it's kind of like based on the consumerism society that we're in. So if you can get rid of the personal and the non-deductible debt, that's definitely an optimal position that you want to be in.
Yeah, and look, that's an interesting point. I mean, particularly when you're talking about in your 40s. So, look, really common strategy that some people might deploy is when you're talking about deductible versus non-deductible debt, you're considering, hey, let's keep the family home, so the non-deductible debt on principal and interest repayments. Let's keep our investment debt on interest-only repayments. And so all of your dollars are going towards your owner-occupied mortgage in order to drive that down faster. There is a psychological impact to that, though.
Yep.
And so I'd start to caution, maybe in your 40s you're considering, let's move everything over to principal and interest, irrespective of the tax position that that's going to put you in. Just because, okay, let's say you optimize everything and you've got, your P&I, or you've got principal and interest repayments on your owner-occupied property and interest only on everything else. From a cash flow side of things, all that you see is my mortgage expense is X. And driving extra towards your owner-occupied mortgage can be done, but it requires so much more discipline versus just having principal and interest on everything, and it doesn't feel like you've got as much money, which means that you're not spending as much money. And so what you might get from a tax benefit, you're losing in a leakage of funds across everything else. So starting to consider those interest-only property mortgages and starting to look at, hey, maybe it's time that we move this over to principal and interest to drive it down.
Yeah, I mean, mathematically, the interest-only scenario works. Psychologically, it's challenging because you're right. You look at your debt and you can't really determine, unless you're doing the net worth calculator and really tracking it closely, you can't really determine how quickly your non-deductible debt is coming down. But then you look at your deductible debt. If that's not reducing because it's on interest only, psychologically, that's a really big impact.
Yeah.
And, you need additional discipline in order to make it work. So I completely agree. And then probably the last one, Andrew, just around that debt piece, going back to the non-deductible, so call it the owner-occupied debt, is what strategies can you deploy in order to try and optimize that? So talking about things like utilization of offset accounts, additional repayments, additional recurring repayments, additional lump sum repayments with things like tax returns and windfalls and things like that, can work really, really well. And a lot of the banking products, the mortgage products that are out there these days are quite flexible in terms of the features that they have.
Yep.
So if you're somebody who, subscribes to our bucketing strategy, our cash flow strategy, and you've got multiple accounts, all of those can operate as an offset account if you're with the right provider. But thinking about that, and similar to like what we described with investing, where a small change over a long period of time has a huge result, it's the same as well when you look at it and map it out and model it from a mortgage perspective as well too.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And look, I think that, another really big thing to consider in all of this is your investment strategy.
Mm-hmm.
How are you investing? So once you've identified that there is that surplus income, what's the strategy? Is it, hey, I'm going to put, 100% of it towards the mortgage because I want to pay down the mortgage and then I'll start investing once the mortgage is done? Is it, okay, I'm not going to focus on paying down the mortgage and I'm going to utilize that surplus income to invest, whether that's in investment properties, whether that's in shares or managed funds or whatever it is? Or is it something in between where you're doing a combination of both and utilizing, the benefits of both? Are you overweight in a particular asset? Have you purchased, your first property maybe in your 30s, which might have been an apartment that suited your lifestyle. You've now had kids, you've moved to a bigger family home, apartment's now an investment property, and all of a sudden, great, your net worth position is higher, but you're fairly overweight in terms of property versus any other assets. Do you start to diversify in ETFs or shares? Depending on what your retirement strategy is, are you planning on working until you're 60 or 65? And so, do you need to put that additional surplus income into superannuation so that it's in a lower tax environment? Or are you planning on finishing work at maybe 50 or 55 and you need, another asset to derive a passive income
Yep.
until superannuation kicks in to be able to take you, until your physical retirement. So I think that really starting to develop that investment strategy is critical in this decade.
And just going back to where do you allocate your money, I mean, yeah, all of those things that you said are extremely relevant, but to simplify it, I think there's four areas or four things that you can do with your money. And we're talking about the surplus that you've got. So after, income, less expenses, what have you got left over? So really there's four things. For me, it's you can spend it or consume it.
Yep.
You can invest it, you can pay down debt, or you can give it away. So they're really the four things that you've got. And you went into specific detail, but trying to find the balance of what works for you from a optimization perspective. So what will yield the best financial result? What will then help, tick your boxes in terms of the financial goals that you want to achieve as well too. And getting that balance right, and it's constantly changing because things always change. Conceptually easy to do, in practice a little bit more difficult because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah.
With life at that particular point in time. But they're the four areas that you tend to think about and what does that then look like? And you're right, in terms of what I think ticks, in our experience anyway, what ticks the most amount of boxes when we do look at this is you consider a bit of everything and you do a bit of everything if you can.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, it is another investment strategy, so to speak. But from an investment standpoint, I mean, at this point in your life and your career, there's also, the consideration around what does it look like from a employment status?
Yeah.
What does it look like from an income side of things? Are you going to be, purchasing into a business? Are you going to be starting up a business? Are you going to have, equity opportunities in where you're working? And making sure that you've got, a strategy to be able to fund that and a strategy to be able to maximize that. And also in conjunction with your accountant, looking at, the structure of everything to make sure that you're doing it in, the most optimal way, whether that be in, a trust, in a company, individually, however you decide to own those assets.
Yeah. The career planning, or not even career planning, but the investment in yourself, I think is probably one of the greatest investments that you can make, and you should be thinking of this. I've heard this saying, so I can't claim it of my own. One of my best friend's dad said it, but the thing that
no one would have known. You could have just claimed that one.
No. Got to be honest here. But so the two biggest impacts that have to your financial perspective, and we'll throw a quote in there from Warren Buffett as well too. I just thought of that. But the biggest thing that has the largest impact from a financial perspective is what you do for a living and who you marry or who your life partner is.
Yeah.
Right. Warren Buffett says a different line. I'm going to butcher this because I don't have it off the top of my tongue. But basically, the things to avoid is the three L's from a financial perspective. Like, what was it? Something around what erodes your net wealth fastest. It's the three L's: ladies, liquor, and leverage. Have to throw a Warren Buffett quote in there, right?
It's not wrong. It's not wrong.
So definitely investing in yourself and your skill set, your ability to earn income, I think is one of the greatest things that you could possibly do for yourself in terms of, financial security. And during those years in your 40s, you're probably in a position where you really want to try and maximize your earning capability.
Yeah, exactly right. And speaking of that, I mean, when you are considering your income, looking at your insurances, particularly your income protection, I mean, this is the age where things can happen. And in addition to that, it's probably the age where income is potentially at its highest point because you're at a point in your career where your income is, or you have enough tenure in your career to demand a higher salary. But at the same time, you're not at a point where you're starting to slow down and wanting to, work an 80% FTE or 60% FTE or whatnot. So making sure that you've got adequate risk mitigation strategies in, income protection, in insurances, in life insurance, in all of that stuff is also, critically important at this point in time as well.
Yep. And as we're getting older, starting to think about mortality, I guess, wills, estate planning, if you've got children, guardianships, powers of attorney, you name it. So sort of rounding out that protection piece.
Yep.
Just dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and making sure that that's all formalised and in place, so you know that your financial position is as robust as it possibly could be. One of the other ones, Andrew, that I really like and I think makes a huge difference, and it's kind of throwing back to that quote that I was talking about before, is making sure or trying as best as possible to make sure that you're aligned with your partner.
Yeah.
Because if you're not on the same page, it's going to be very difficult to do, pretty much anything
really
from a financial aspect. So as an example, if you've got a goal of being debt-free by a certain age, and what that requires is maybe some accelerated debt repayments, if your partner doesn't want to make that sacrifice and use some of the surplus money on that, and they wanted to spend it or give it away or invest it, then you're not going to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very difficult. So I think partner alignment is huge, and getting really on the same page from a money values perspective. And the other thing too is regular check-ins. So doing, like financial date nights and stuff like that, making sure you're on track, coming together, total visibility and transparency over everything, and making, I guess, big financial decisions together.
Yeah.
But both knowing where you're at a particular point in time, and probably one step further with the thinking, but throwing back to what I was talking about before with the estate planning, is making sure that both people know where everything is and how everything operates from a financial aspect.
I think it's so important.
There's so many times that we sit in front of somebody who's had a partner that's passed away. Oh, my partner's managed all of the money traditionally, and I've got no idea where anything is. And they've got money and they've got assets. They just don't know how to access it.
Yeah.
And there it sits.
And it's just, I think that when you're making decisions together, you're on the same path, you're aligned, and more than anything, it's if things go wrong, it's a joint decision. There's no blame game. There's no, none of that stuff. So I think that being aligned is critically important. Finishing it off, there's probably a few, pitfalls and a few things that you could avoid in this decade. I think the first one, lifestyle creep, increased income can usually mean an increased savings level. So making sure that you've got a really good handle around your budget, around your cash flow, and some discipline around that. It's not to say that if your income doesn't increase, you don't increase your expenses, but you do that, essentially by making a decision to do it rather than it just happening and not knowing where the money goes.
Mm-hmm.
Another really big pitfall is waiting for the perfect time. So a lot of people will just, delay investing or delay doing anything until it's the right time or until, something happens. There's always an excuse and there's always a reason to, put off doing something which might feel initially a little bit uncomfortable, but, as you go through it, provides you with more clarity and more certainty. And I think that one of the other biggest ones in this decade is putting everything towards the home, really in terms of cash flow, whether that's upsizing to a massive house, doing huge major renos, or just paying down debt and not focusing on anything else, and really ignoring all of the other opportunities that are available as well.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think I'd add one more to it, and you're going to laugh at me here, but stick with me because you know where I'm going. Neglecting your health is a key one. So obviously you're laughing because
Billy's an athlete now.
I've turned into a bit of an athlete, going to the gym all the time and stuff. But no, seriously, the way that it comes back to what we're talking about is if you neglect your health, not only obviously is that bad from a health perspective, but I tell you what, healthcare,
from a wealth?
Yep, healthcare gets or maintaining and improving your health gets very expensive the older you get. So the more issues.
That's why you started going to the gym.
I'm still in my 30s,
because you're in your 40s.
This doesn't apply to me. So
you're seeing it from a financial perspective.
But ultimately, what's the point if you're unhealthy and you can't enjoy, the fruits of your labour, so to speak? So that's probably the last one that I wanted to finish on. So got a chance to talk about the gym, threw in a few Warren Buffett quotes in there as well too. So
successful podcast, Billy.
Told everybody I'm still in my 30s a couple of times, which is great. So Andrew, well said, well summarised to our viewers and our listeners. Hope you got a whole heap of value out of that. If you wanted to have a chat about your circumstances, feel free to reach out to Andrew and myself. Like, subscribe, share it so we could get this, these great messages out to a whole range of people. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AM